Let's dive right into something totally unique today. We aren't just looking at a historical event here, we're actually deconstructing the literal blueprint used to create a captivating premium Netflix-style investigative documentary about the Lehman Brothers crash. Have you ever wondered exactly how creators take massive, incredibly complex financial disasters and distill them into those gripping streaming documentaries you just can't stop watching? Well, we've got the exact source code for this explainer, the creative requirements and structural demands used to build one of these narratives right from the ground up. We're going to break down exactly how raw historical data is manipulated, paced, and styled to keep you absolutely glued to your screen.
Our path today is mapped out into 4 distinct acts. We've got setting the cinematic stage, unpacking the Lehman scum, victims and the downfall, and finally, consequences and final lessons.
Starting off with Section 1, setting the cinematic stage, which is the absolute foundation of a Netflix-style narrative. So, this blueprint is designed for a massive, premium, global audience. The source material explicitly targets viewers across the United States, Canada, the UK, Australia, and Europe. And to capture and hold this very specific demographic, the creator is boxed into some incredibly rigid, carefully measured constraints. For instance, the final runtime must be exactly between 12 to 18 minutes. That translates to a highly economical script size of just 2,000 to 2,500 words. I mean, think about that for a second. You literally have to explain one of the most convoluted financial crashes in modern history in just 2,500 words. To pull this off, the blueprint demands a voice that is professional and intelligent, but it has to be written in natural conversational English. It absolutely cannot sound like a textbook reading. It needs to sound like an expert sitting right across from you, telling you a genuinely fascinating story.
Now, there is a really fascinating tension built right into these instructions. On one hand, you have a stylistic mandate. It has to feel like a dark, mysterious Netflix documentary. It needs to be suspenseful, driven by heavy emotional storytelling. The writer has to actively build that suspense throughout the entire script. But, to balance that out, you have this strict reality requirement. While building all this cinematic drama, the writer is explicitly ordered to keep every single statement completely factual and balanced. Oh, and you have to absolutely avoid repetition. Balancing this dark, suspenseful tone with the uncompromising rule of strict reality is basically the tightrope the writer has to walk. You're entertaining the audience, for sure, but you are never, ever allowed to invent facts.
And to capture that massive global audience immediately, the instructions demand an emotionally powerful hook right out of the gate. Within the very first 15 seconds, the viewer's attention must be locked in. Why? Because there's just no time for long, boring preambles or dry historical context. The blueprint requires you to hit the audience with the heavy emotional weight of the Lehman crash before you even begin to explain the background of the bank itself.
Moving on to Section 2, unpacking the Lehman scam, structuring the fraud for the viewer.
We've actually taken that required 12-point list from the source and mapped it onto our 18-minute maximum timeline. So you start with that fast 15-second hook and a really brief introduction. By minute 4, you're already moving through the background and the rise of the institution. Then, right around the middle of the documentary, minute 8, is when the blueprint dictates you must actually explain the scam. By minute 12, you're pivoting to the victims and the investigation. Finally, you spend the last stretch covering the downfall, the court consequences, and the ending. It's essentially a highly engineered roller coaster. Every single section has a perfectly designated place to ensure the pacing never drags for even a second.
Now, when we reach that crucial middle section to explain the scam itself, the blueprint provides a very specific 4-step staircase. First up, introduce the cast of characters. Who are the actual people involved? Second, describe the genesis. How did this thing actually start? Third, explain the psychology. How did this massive operation gain the trust of the public and the markets? And fourth, show exactly how the fraud worked. But the most vital instruction here? Use simple language. The blueprint explicitly recognizes that throwing around complex financial concepts is just going to alienate the viewer if they aren't made easily digestible. So, you build the human element first, then you explain the mechanics, and you do it all in plain English.
All right, on to Section 3, victims and the downfall, bringing emotional weight to the crash. The source dictates that we absolutely must describe the victims and the financial impact first. But immediately after that, we have to answer this really vital question. How did investigators actually uncover the truth? This is the moment the narrative shifts from being just a tragedy into a full-blown detective story. The audience has seen the scam, they've felt the emotional weight of what happened to the victims, and now they need the satisfaction of the unraveling. The blueprint structures this so the investigation phase serves as this thrilling bridge between the crime and the inevitable downfall.
To make this downfall feel completely real and visceral, the blueprint provides a specific toolkit. It instructs the creator to use realistic dialogue when historically appropriate. That means pulling actual quotes, emails, or testimony from the Lehman crash and weaving them seamlessly into cinematic narration. It's not just some narrator dryly reading facts, it's a fully produced experience. It uses smooth transitions that make the downfall of this massive financial institution feel incredibly immediate and absolutely devastating. You are essentially putting the viewer right inside the room as the walls start closing in on those executives.
And that brings us to Section 4, Consequences and Final Lessons. Landing the plane.
The resolution relies on taking a firm moral stance combined with some really smart channel growth strategies. The blueprint explicitly states the writer must outline the arrests, trials, and legal outcomes if applicable. But there is a hard, non-negotiable rule here. Never glorify the criminals or teach illegal activity. The tone has to remain objective and cautionary. Then, after the legal dust finally settles, the script must end with the single biggest lesson the viewers can learn from the whole case. And finally, the mechanics of digital media come into play. You have to finish with a highly memorable closing line that transitions immediately into a strong call to subscribe, locking in that audience retention for whatever documentary comes next.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, consider this for a moment. The biggest lesson here might not even be about the financials of the Lehman crash itself. It might actually be about how information is packaged and sold to us. Even the most incredibly complex historical frauds are ultimately distilled down into meticulously crafted, suspenseful, 15-minute stories. They are highly engineered to grab our emotions, simplify complex mechanics, and teach us a moral lesson, all while keeping us thoroughly entertained. The next time you sit down to watch a slick, dark documentary, ask yourself, are you just learning history, or are you perfectly following a 12-step blueprint? Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. See you next time.